And the most important thing for the gut, can it break down that organic salmon or that grass-fed beef or the organic broccoli? And can you actually get the nutrients from that? If you can't do that, then all the money and all the time that went into gathering that food for your family and trying to be ageless basically is going to be wasted at some level.
Hey there! Welcome to the Evolving Ageless podcast. This is the Enlightened Woman's Antidote to Aging, and welcome to Season 2. So I'm your host, Michelle Dreilich, and as always, you've heard me say this, I am on a mission to change the way women age. And each week, I'm joined by experts in their fields, medical engineers, physicians, nutritionists, all sharing their advice, experience, and outcomes with their patients on what's working best to actually help us change the way we age. So, today is an interesting topic. I'm really excited. We're going to talk about the gut. Now, I know we've talked about, peripherally talked about the gut. The gut is kind of an awful sounding word. It really is another way of just saying your digestive tract, the entire digestive system. And so what's magnificent about this is we talk very often about chronic inflammation or chronic disease or living ageless. And it's crazy to think that food is not somehow related to that. And this is where we're going to dive in today on nutrition and digestion, because I think the really exciting thing about this topic is unless you've been locked up in your house for a year, which actually we have, so forget that. If you're watching the news, reading, everything now is about the gut health, the microbiome, right? We're hearing more and more about probiotics, prebiotics, now parabiotics. There's so many things going on. Lots of talk about the gut. And from a functional medicine perspective, which is what I talk about a lot, and lots of my guests are functional medicine experts, what we talk about is the gut has been a conversation for us for over 10 years. And it takes about 10 to 15 years for these early clinical findings, the research findings. It takes about 10 years for the actual medical community to catch up to where the scientific community is. And so for all of us that have been in the functional medicine space, my guest today is included in that. We have essentially been talking about the gut for a long time, and now it's got its heyday where it's now accepted by all practitioners that the role that our digestive tract plays in our health is paramount to our staying healthy and likewise aging less. So my guest today is Stephen Wright. So he's a friend of mine. I've known him for quite a while, and he's a genius in the area of gut health. In fact, he loses me very often, and I have to pull him back in and start back at the beginning. Stephen is a medical engineer. He understands digestion, honestly, like no one else I've ever met. He's a Kalish Functional Medicine Institute graduate. He specializes in just the gut. He has spent, it came from his own experience. Like so many of us are on these personal journeys, and this is how we find ourselves. So Stephen has spent almost $400,000 over the years overcoming his own health challenges that were related to his digestion. He's worked with Western practitioners, conventional doctors, functional medicine experts, even shamans to find the root causes of his issues, which led him directly to the gut. So Stephen is the founder of healthygut.com. Like I said, he is an expert in the gut. And Stephen, I am so excited for you to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here as well, Michelle. This has been a long time coming.
I know. So let's start kind of at the very, very beginning. I know you talk a lot about kind of this triad, this gut triad of health, but we also talked about the idea that it's actually the gut triad of healthy aging, right? Or preventing us from kicking off that aging switch too soon. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think people need to, first realize that my college background, my initial degree was in electrical engineering. So I see things from a different perspective than most doctors or practitioners. I'm always trying to eliminate risk. I'm trying to eliminate variables and risk and make sure that outcomes are as high as possible based on the risk profile. And so that coupled with my weirdo-ness, which just means that like I've been falling for miracle pills and snake oils and scams like my entire life. I'm just attracted to that kind of stuff, like acai berry or raspberry ketones or whatever it is, including, all kinds of crazy stuff from Asia or China or Russia or even here in the US. I want to buy it. I want to try it. I want to see if there's any validity to it. And so those two things means that I spend a lot of money and make a lot of mistakes, and I've fallen for a lot of things. And when you do that enough times, I think you do gain some wisdom. And the wisdom, along with the engineering perspective that I found with gut health, is that we've been so focused on these sexy new ideas around probiotics and prebiotics and collagens and all these things, which are not bad. They're not necessarily a waste, but they're not the first principle. They're not the most important thing. And the most important thing for the gut is, can it break down that organic salmon or that grass-fed beef or the organic broccoli? And can you actually get the nutrients from that? If you can't do that, then all the money and all the time that went into gathering that food for your family and trying to be ageless basically is going to be wasted at some level. Is it 20% waste, 50% waste, 80% waste? That'll depend on your level of health and your level of your aging, basically. And so when I keep returning back to first principles, how can I make myself, because like I'm vain as well, and I want to age really well. And so how could I prevent that? And how can I keep my gut in working order? It wasn't all these really expensive, cool new technologies. It was going back to the basics, which is, does the stomach function properly? Does the small intestine do its job properly? And how is the microbiome doing in the large intestine? And if you support the mechanical nature of those organs, then they work really well for a really long time. But if those organs start to lose their capacity to do their job, all the rest of the really sexy stuff is just kind of throwing, it's kind of throwing lipstick on a pig, if you're that methodology of like you're dressing something up that doesn't have good internals. And so that's kind of where we get back to this trio of aging, which comes back to stomach acid, low enzyme function, and poor microbiome diversity.
First of all, I love the idea that going through what you went through and trying to find the answers yourself, you're right. The way, doing Dr. Google and talking to physicians, clinicians that are kind of periphery to understanding it, even gastroenterology can put you in a position where, you start to think, is this right? And I think for me, the first place that we start to figure out that maybe the conventional wisdom on the gut, what we have always thought and learned, comes around this idea of stomach acid. And I think it's a brilliant place to start because, we might as well start at the top of digestion. You chew your food, your saliva helps breaks it down. You start to break down some things. But once it gets in your stomach, right? How many people out there are taking, Prilosec and Prevacid and all these different products that help them because they have this idea, and the media and the medical community, I think at large, has focused on this idea that you have too much acid, right? And so many people think I need to take something to neutralize my acid. So let's start at that first arm of the triad, right? The stomach. If you think about it, it makes total sense. Why would you make more acid as you age, right? Because acid is very hard to make. It's a super powerful, very, very potent acid that you make in your body, and it takes a lot of energy to do it. So as we age, why would we make more?
the industrial complex, the marketing complexes over the last 30 years have really tried to play to our confirmation bias as humans and try to trick us into things that have been proven false in the research, but it makes a really good narrative. Like, I've had heartburn. I even, previous to my fiance, I've had a girlfriend prior who thought she was having a heart attack, but she was just having acid reflux. So I'm not minimizing what high acid feels like. And I'm not saying that high acid doesn't exist. It does exist. It's just very rare, like probably less than 5% of people who have heartburn, acid reflux like problems. The problem is that it feels that way, and then you immediately make up a story, and then you see a marketing thing that reinforces that story, and it becomes this accepted belief that's just not biologically true. And so now, we have data showing that as you age, at least 10% of people can't keep their stomach regulated acid-wise. Like it starts creeping up, it gets too high, pH-wise. So the pH scale is super confusing. It took me like 5 years to really get the pH scale. It's so confusing. But basically, you want your acid really low in your stomach. And then when food comes in, your body rushes a bunch of acid in there and enzymes and some other factors to break down your food. This is why grandma said, don't go swimming. It wasn't because you're going to get a stitch and die and drown. It's because you need your blood going to your stomach. And if it's rushing out to your extremities or to your heart so that you're swimming, you're going to have indigestion. And so stomach acid, as we age, the ability to release it in response to food declines. That's what the research shows. It becomes dysregulated. And stomach acid, one of the main things that it does is it's covering your food particles in this acid bath, which one neutralizes any incoming bugs. Those could be all kinds of bugs, parasites, bacteria, viruses, things like that. It neutralizes those bugs. So it's your first line of immune defense. And then two, that acid causes the food molecules to begin to open up. Like, think about a walnut. You can't crush a walnut in your hands, but we chew it a few times and we swallow it, and then we hope our body processes it. That acid is breaking down the outside of that walnut, opening it up so that enzymes could come in and take these little amino acids off and like basically cut my fingers off here as it opens up. And that's what the enzymes do. And so without the stomach acid, number one, you have immune risk. Number two, you don't unfold your food so that the enzymes can do their job, which increases risk for all types of issues. And then three, stomach acid sets the regulation speed. It's the main sort of speed dial on how fast or how slow your food moves through your body and into the toilet. So for some people with low acid, that means diarrhea. Some people with low acid, that means constipation. It's individual dynamics there. And how do we know this is true? Well, you can go look up the studies on PPIs, Prevaceds, those types of things, and you'll see that if you take acid-lowering drugs for longer than a certain length of time, you will end up with things like risk of fracture going up. You end up with increased risk of SIBO. You end up with all these sort of like chronic aging style issues that you wouldn't otherwise have had you had proper acid function and not been suppressing it or turning it completely off. So stomach acid's highly underrated. I'm very excited about it because, if you want to get that food in there, if you want to stay healthy, you got to have it.
Right. And so I think what's really cool is the answer is, what's funny is conventional wisdom says it's too much stomach acid. And in fact, the solution is you should be adding stomach acid. You should be adding acid, not taking it away, right? Or neutralizing it, because as you just said, and that was I've never heard it explained actually that well. I've always understood the pH and the sphincters of the, closing and locking food in. But I think what you said was brilliant. Our absorption of nutrients starts with a proper amount of acid. And so if anyone out there suffers from, indigestion, chronic indigestion, heartburn, acid reflux, whatever, this is wisdom that kind of rocks your world, because it's not about neutralizing. It's actually about adding and supporting in the right way. So okay, so now we've got the food. Let's say we have enough acid. Maybe we're replacing it with a supplement, or our stomach acid is functioning really well. So our food gets, essentially, the enzymes are working on the food. The acid does its job of opening it. Everything kind of starts the absorption in the stomach, but that's not the ideal. That's not like the final place where our food is absorbed. That's just kind of where it starts, right? So it leaves the stomach, right? I remember it's called chyme. It leaves the stomach in this mushy, slimy stuff, and it ends up in the small bowel, right? So let's describe from there what's going on.
So at the top of the small bowel is where your bile and your pancreatic enzymes and sodium bicarbonate, or baking soda basically, is dumped in with that chyme to raise the pH. Because again, pH is, again, a acid-base balance. That's the main driver, the speed dial in your digestion. So if it's too high, too low, it's typically related to a pH thing.
So it's coming out of the stomach and it's really acidic, right? Like,
yeah,
because it just had an acid bath. And so
yeah, it's going to
now
be like a 2.5, two
wow.
to three, basically.
Wow. So just so everyone knows, like 7 is neutral, right? So a 2.5 is really acidic. And I would imagine our small bowel and intestines are not designed to handle that level of acid, right? I mean, this
No,
is hydrochloric acid we're talking about. Like, if we spilled that on our desk, it would start to bore a hole in our desk. So
100%.
okay, great.
So enzymes are another amazing molecule. Again, I get so nerdy, but I love these little things that make all the difference. Like that's like what really gets me excited when I find a health idea that is very small but moves a really big needle, or a really big lever, I guess is a poor analogy. But enzymes function in a pH window. And so pancreatic enzymes function in the window of 7 to 9. So get that. So you're dumping enough bicarbonate to raise that food from 2 to 3 up to 7 to 9. If you miss that window, too low or too high, your pancreatic enzymes do not function very well. Like, they will be turned basically off. So we can't have the enzymes on in the pancreas because they might start eating the pancreas. So the body needs an intelligent system to keep them regulated. And how the body does that is through pH. So outside of that 7 to 9 window, you might only get 10 to 20% activity range on that pancreatic enzyme. So if your acid's off, you can expect your pancreatic enzyme function to be off. And that's including the fact that, like, the pancreas ages and bile ducts age, and all these things could go wrong. That's just assuming your pancreas is working correctly and the plumbing is working correctly. But anyways, how it's supposed to work is that stuff dumps in there. It gets up to like an 8, whatever, somewhere around there. The pancreatic enzymes are eating it up. They're like the super bad or super awesome enzymes. They're doing all the heavy lifting for lipase, which is for fat, amylase for carbohydrates, and protease for proteins and amino acids. After that, you get into the brush border, which you were describing this in the intro, that, like, you can think about your small intestine kind of like the hose on an older vacuum with all the folds in it. The inside of your small intestine has all these ways, including these villi, which are these little fingers that protrude off of the lining that actually give off enzymes. They do a lot of things, but one of the main things they do is give off brush border enzymes, which further break down your food. So you've probably heard about lactose deficiency and lactose intolerance. And the common narrative that's told to people is that you have a genetic issue such that you lose your lactase as you age. But I don't know that that's ever been proven versus the fact that your brush border has aged, or it's been destroyed through infections or inflammation, like celiac disease. So
I think one of the really positive things that came out of this whole COVID shutting in is that we are now working in our homes and our animals. And so it's actually really positive. So I love hearing other people's animals bark.
yeah, we are real people just trying our best. That's for sure.
I love it.
But anyway, so lactose intolerance might just be an aging issue with the brush border, which those little hairs, the little villi, actually release the lactose degrading enzyme lactase. Without lactose does cause upset tummies, diarrhea, all kinds of bloating, things like that. So those brush border enzymes are crazy important for breaking down carbohydrates. And they're pretty much the reason, I believe, one of the reasons why we have all these FODMAP issues. We have all these, if you have a legume or a broccoli issue, part of it comes from the brush water. And then the last part comes from the microbiome, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But those combined basically create a lot of the bloating, a lot of the upset, the food allergies, food sensitivities, depending on what kind it is. All those things pretty much originate in this process right here.
I love it. So, okay. So the chyme, it mixes with the bile, it mixes with pancreatic enzymes, which are just digestive enzymes that are made in your pancreas. And then it also adds sodium bicarbonate to get the pH higher, right? And so now you've got this more neutralized, more basic kind of mush, for a better word, into your small intestine. Your small intestine is where all those microvilli live. Your small intestine, believe it or not, for everyone listening, is where most of the nutrients are absorbed. This is where your body says, "Oh, that's a vitamin. I need that. That's a mineral. I need that. And this is a fat, and I need that." So your body, these enzymes start breaking this food down, because your body doesn't know what food is. Your immune system doesn't know what food is. It knows what nutrients are. That's it. And so the enzymes act on our food to turn it from food into enzyme, right? Turn it from chyme, essentially, which is like mushy food, into actual nutrients that your body can use, right? So that is a very tiny space to let the food through, right? The food has to be very small, which, let's talk about digestive symptoms that people feel very often that could be related to not having either enough enzymes or the right enzyme. So if you're deficient in these enzymes, what are some of the symptoms people feel?
I mean, they feel the natural or the normal things: bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn, pain,
Cramping.
cramping. Yeah, all these things. And that's a concerning symptom. Like, if you're really into an ageless lifestyle and life, and you want to look your best and feel your best, you really need to pay attention to that, because the consequences of what's happening inside of your gut that produce that is essentially, much of that is a pH dysregulation. It's a toxin thing, and then it's your bacteria in the wrong spot having a party. Like, basically, you're not absorbing your nutrients, therefore something else is showing up to eat them, which happens to be bugs. Those bugs give off things like LPS, which are toxins, like gnarly toxins. You do not want those in the body. Those hit your gut wall and cause inflammation. That can lead to leaky gut, which is basically chronic inflammation of the gut. And at that point, it's just like Animal House in your gut, and you probably feels that way, right? Like,
Right.
People are getting thrown out windows. There's a kegger going on in there. It looks like it. It feels like it. That's what's happening, and that is going to cause systemic inflammation. Local inflammation in the gut causes systemic inflammation. We know this. There's all kinds of research showing, for instance, if you get in a car accident, or if your son or your daughter gets in some sort of accident and they get a brain injury, they get a concussion, they immediately have leaky gut. The same signals, the same molecules that keep the blood-brain barrier in place keep the gut barrier in place. And so damage to one equals damage to the other. They've shown this in research. They also show that, once LPS starts getting into the body, it travels everywhere, causing all kinds of systemic inflammation. And basically, we all have a genetic code that's slightly non-ideal. Some of us are better off than others, but we have what's called a family history, and all doctors take this and know this, and they know, okay, everybody's had heart disease. Well, that's your genetic weak link. You throw a bunch of inflammation, a bunch of LPS, you're going to get heart disease. Somebody else might get a stroke. Somebody else might get cancer. But that's kind of how you match from what's happening today to how you're going to end up potentially dying if you don't take care of your inflammation.
Does that make sense? Does everybody get that? I mean, I'm going to pause here because that is a heavy jump, but it's the reality. All right, so now we talked about these are the first two arms of that triad of aging and gut health, right? So the stomach, now we're in the small intestine with enzymes, stomach and acid, small intestine enzymes. So now it moves on into the microbiome, which is, I guess, the small intestine's a part of that too. So
Yeah,
let's
probably
lay it
about
on us.
yeah, probably about 20% of your microbiome is in the lower, very, very lower part of your small intestine, and 80% is in the upper large intestine. So right where they meet is where the microbiome really exists. A lot of people don't get that, and I didn't get it honestly for years. Like
I've never heard that. That's so cool. That's a really cool fact. Yeah.
yeah, like what I'm talking about today has taken literally like a decade to understand.
Right.
And a lot of mistakes along the way. So, anyways, as we get into that portion of digestion, there's microbiome enzymes. The brush border enzymes the body makes, the pancreatic enzymes the body makes, the pepsin in your stomach, the body makes all that stuff. But the bugs in our microbiome, the good ones, they make digestive enzymes as well to help us break down this food so that they get nutrients. It's a symbiotic relationship. Now, what's crazy is that if you lose those classes of bacteria, or you've taken enough antibiotics, or you've done certain things, you will lose certain ability to break down certain types of food molecules, especially carbohydrates seem very sensitive. So I just did a piece in our email newsletter yesterday about alpha galactidase, and you may have heard this as Beano. Beano's been around for a long time. Everyone's kind of like, probably if they've had a child, the more you eat, the more you chew, beans for every meal type of thing. And like beans are universally high in something called raffinose. It's a type of carbohydrate that the microbiome actually mostly breaks down. A little brush border enzyme called sucrase plus alpha galactidase equals full digestion of raffinose. Without it, you have bloating, you have gas, and it can be extremely painful. It can feel like knives in your gut. Like that's the level of gas and bloating and digestive issues I had to go through. It's not for everybody. Only like 30% of IBS people have it. But it's not a joke for some people. Some people, it's just a mild annoyance. Some people, it's like a real, like this is the number one problem in their life. And what that typically is a lack of these enzymes in breaking down these foods. And so foods like broccoli or cauliflower or Brussels sprouts, like universally regarded as healthy foods, are not healthy for an individual who cannot break those foods down. Number one, it causes pain. But number two, you're creating all those extra metabolites I talked about that can damage the gut wall. So this idea that you should just eat raw kale or raw spinach or broccoli, well, it's not true if you can't break it down. It's a toxin if you can't break it down. But you can work on your microbiome and take exogenous enzymes. So take something like holozymes or whatever digestive enzyme that includes all three of these pancreatic, brush border, microbiome enzymes to help you break this stuff down. And for those of us, again, who've gone through a lot of antibiotics, who maybe have had a decade or a couple years of some intense health issues, or are just aging, you're going to end up with microbiome loss or the diversity. You want like basically a really big ecosystem in your gut. Your microbiome should be like the most diverse place in the world. Lots and lots of species and lots of things going on. That's a healthy microbiome. As we age, studies show, I think starting around 50-ish, everyone, like each decade, you lose more and more of your microbiome diversity. And so it gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And this is thought of as potentially a huge component to aging. This might be why probiotics actually work. Like all these things that we didn't know, like why do some humans who eat more vegetables, who can break them down, why do they age better? Well, it might be because their microbiome is better. It might be because the phytochemicals, the really bright greens and orange and yellows and reds, feed very different and very important types of bacteria. And so these bacteria, they get to live there because they make things like digestive enzymes and other nutrients from our food that we need. And so when you hear things like bloating and gas and upset tummy, those types of things, think about potentially what happened with your microbiome. Where are you in your life cycle? Because that really could be the issue that's happening at this point.
100%. And not only have I seen it in clinic with patients over a decade, I've seen it with myself, right? So I've talked about this before on the show. I'm allergic to gluten, allergic to wheat, actually. And so I know gluten-free is a fad right now, but I've been gluten-free before gluten-free was a fad, before you could actually find gluten-free anything. And so the idea that I didn't know this until I eliminated it, right? So now that everyone's tracking with systemic inflammation, let me just divert here for just a moment because I know this is common for people. So I suffered from chronic sinus infections. I had sinus infections every month over month. And I was in the corporate world. Plus, I did yoga constantly to the point that I eventually opened my own yoga studio after I left corporate. And so I was doing yoga all the time. Now, if you've ever had a sinus infection, you can't tip your head further than this without like being in excruciating pain, let alone stand on your head or fold forward, right? It became a hazard for me. So I lived on Afrin, right? We all know that. My nasal passages were a mess. So I did this test for a food allergy, the skin prick test. If any of you have ever had a skin prick test, you'll know what that means. I came up wildly like a wheel that was enormous to wheat. I took wheat out of my diet for a month. I did not have a sinus infection that month. I left out that I was on antibiotics. Probably 8 times a year I took antibiotics in between my Afrin, right? And so couldn't understand it. Took gluten and wheat out of my diet for a month, a 30-day elimination diet. The textbook way you're supposed to test this now, which is what I did, is at the end of the 30 days, pummel yourself with that food. And I did. I was at a party. I had little kids at the time. I ate my pizza. I ate their crust. Like I was pummeling my gut. That was on a Saturday. By Sunday night, I was deaf in one ear. The fluid from the immune response, right? And I had a full-blown nasty green sinus infection by Sunday night. So that's how I found it. So chronic sinusitis is so common in people, and it's almost always, always, always a food allergy, right? And so going back to that story of, you get caught in these vicious cycles. That's the tip of the iceberg. That's what started the whole food allergy cascade, the leaky gut for me, right? Because we won't even get into that today. That's a whole nother show. But the leaky gut and the whole cascade of systemic inflammation that was kicked off, right? But now let's talk about my microbiome, because I took 8 courses of antibiotics a year. So all the good bacteria that lived in there, and just so people understand, like probiotic is what we call them when they're in a bottle, in a little capsule that we take, right? But in our bodies, there are microbiome. So talk about that antibiotic use microbiome.
Yeah, so antibiotic use and I was caught up in those generations as well. My dermatologist, I think, should have faced sanctions for malpractice. I got 4 years of Bactrim DS until I basically wiped out my entire microbiome, and Bifidobacter, which is generally regarded as a probiotic or a beneficial, actually took over my entire intestinal tract. I passed out at work. I woke up in the hospital. They were all confused because they're like, "There's no bad things in you. There's just way too many good things." So you really need a balance, and antibiotics can do some intense stuff, and they're like World War II bombing. Like they're just dropping bombs across a whole city, hoping there's bad guys there. That's what happens when you take antibiotics. It's not precision bombing. It's not what you see, in today's military usage of terms. And so when that happens, one of the most important things about your microbiome, remember, those bugs are symbiotic. They make things called short-chain fatty acids. And the most important of those short-chain fatty acids is called butyrate. Butyrate is like magnesium for your gut or something, or the magnesium of your gut. I don't know. Most people are familiar with that. Magnesium is needed for like 300 plus cellular reactions. It's needed across almost every organ that we test for. It's very important. You don't want that. Well, butyrate, the same thing is happening. It's 100% needed for your colon to work. It's very important to keeping your oxygen levels low in your colon. And then it's systemically everywhere we look, your organs need it as well. So it helps increase bone mass. It helps lower bone loss. There's clinical trials going on right now in dementia and Alzheimer's because we do know that it affects the brain, and we're not exactly sure how. It's super important for asthma and allergies that are related to the upper respiratory tract. Essentially every autoimmune disease that has been tested, they find lower or disrupted butyrate production. So butyrate is essential for healthy living and healthy life. and it's only made by those microbiome bugs. If you disrupt that ecosystem or destroy those bugs through antibiotic use, you create basically a high oxygen environment in your colon or your large intestine. This is bad. Normally, you think about high oxygen as being good. In your colon or in your large intestine, that is not what we need. We need low oxygen for these anaerobic, meaning without oxygen, bacteria to grow, because anaerobics are butyrate producers, among other things. It's a big generalization, but the butyrate people or bugs, I guess they're not people, they need lowered oxygen. So antibiotics come in, they destroy a bunch of species of gut bugs. It gets some of the bad things, but it also gets the good things. Your oxygen levels go up. That causes the butyrate producers to go down. Your butyrate production suffers. And now you're in this vicious cycle where you end up just taking more and more antibiotics. A lot of people can relate to like, well, yeah, after, like 3 months after that antibiotic course or 8 weeks after, like things were never right again in my gut, or, everything changed on the toilet. And this is why your body's trying to get back down to homeostasis or health, and it can't. It needs that butyrate production because the colon cells use about 95% of that butyrate. Only 5% goes systemic. And in order for them to metabolize the butyrate to stay alive in their preferential way, they need oxygen. So it's a symbiotic, it's a whole ecosystem. It's like 7th grade, seriously, biodome stuff. It's so easy and so complex at the same time. Another solution to the war in your gut and returning to health is you change the ecosystem. You change the rules of the game. If you change the ecosystem, just like in the biodome, if you kill the frogs off or you kill the mosquitoes off that the frogs eat, everybody dies like in 3 months. The same thing's going on in your gut. So you can change the ecosystem, change the rules of the game, and then things can return back to their normal state. That's why taking the amount of research that's gone into probiotics for antibiotic use recovery over the last 10 years has been, I think, in the billions. And they've all successfully been junk. Like nothing's really worked. Like they're just not that helpful for recovering from antibiotic destroyed microbiome.
They don't live very long by themselves, right?
Well, like you said, you're throwing more soldiers or throwing more into the ecosystem, but the ecosystem is the problem. The ecosystem is what needs to be healed. Right. If you set up the right conditions, nature lives. All life, including, bugs, just want to live. I mean, that's literally a first principle of life. Life lives. Life wants to live. So if we change the ecosystem to an ecosystem that is really good for a butyrate producing bacteria, and then we give it food or prebiotics that those bugs need to eat, they will come back. It's like throwing peanut butter on the sidewalk. Like if you really want ants, throw some sugar or some peanut butter on the sidewalk. You'll get ants. We can do the same thing in our guts.
Now that we've got the whole story together, right? Any one of these 3 areas, I mean, they all have to work in concert with one another, because if you think about it, we say like the stomach is upstream, right, of the microbiome. So if it's messed up in the stomach, it's going to affect the small bowel and the enzymes. It's going to affect the microbiome, right? So the microbiome is almost guaranteed to suffer in some capacity, because it's going to get a direct hit either from the stomach having an issue, from the enzymes in the small bowel having an issue, or whatever it is that you've got going on in your microbiome, whether it's antibiotic, things coming from the outside in, medications that we take. So this is the big thing. I want everyone to understand this. Stephen and I, we run in this circle, right? I have Ageless LX and the whole Ageless LX formulation, and I'm just so committed to creating a product that works, right? It helps women change the way they age. There's no question about it. Thousands of testimonials. We know it works. Not everyone in our industry, right, makes products that work. And I think everyone can agree on that, because we've all tried dozens, if not hundreds, of products that we've just stopped using because they just don't work. So Stephen is one of those guys that I met in the very beginning and knew, like, we're birds of a feather, right? Like, it's not about making money. It's about helping people. It's about changing something. And so for me, it's changing the way women age. For Stephen, it's changing the health of people through digestive support and digestive health. And so, Stephen, I have to say, I've never said this to you personally, but the products that you make, there's just nothing like them. Definitely not in a store on a shelf, but there's just nothing like them because you work with physicians who are on the forefront of the research and scientists that are understanding what's coming out of the emerging research. And then you build these amazing products. And what's amazing is that you'll see people try to rip off your products in a cheaper way because your products are hard to make. They're just high potency. And so I want to bring it full circle because, all of this education is amazing, but what to do, what can people do is really critical. So, supporting stomach acid production and maintenance, you've got a product for that you've created. You've got a product for enzymes. Like I said, Holozyme is my go-to on my shelf all the time. And then the tributyrate, the idea that we can actually repair the microbiome inherently from within. Your tributyrate product, there's no one using tributyrates these days. I mean, you see them here and there, but not in any meaningful way and not in the comprehensive story. So tell us just about your products.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, look, I take recommendations sacred. So again, a lot of people text me that are influencers or New York Times bestsellers. I'm the guy you come to when the regular stuff doesn't work because I just can't stop innovating. It's part of what happened to me as a child and my trauma and stuff, but also part of my engineering nature. And so the Healthy Gut product lineup is that innovation. It's the child of that. And we are our product formulas are hardly ever staying the same. They just keep getting better and better based on research and clinical testing and customer feedback. And so what we have right now is 3 products that you mentioned there: HCL Guard, Holozymes, and Tributyrin X. And so if we start top to bottom, because that's how we've talked today, you don't necessarily have to start at the top. You can start anywhere with whatever you seem to get most excited about, because just one of these products, all of my products, you can feel the difference. Like literally, that's like we have I'm probably going to rename it the Feel It Guarantee or something, because with the product, it's so potent and so powerful that most people wouldn't advise me to sell it to the public. Like this should be a practitioner only product. There's some products that are so potent, they keep them behind paywalls so that doctors can help you with dosing, because you can have upset. We have health coaches that will walk you through any dosing issues. If you're not seeing results in like 2 weeks, you gotta talk to one of our health coaches. They will get you figured out. And if not, we'll give you a refund. That's the guarantee that we stand behind. So anyways, HCL Guard is a combination of betaine HCl and pepsin, which has been used in functional medicine for like 30, 40 years, with a prokinetic and intrinsic factor, which has never been done before. And just made sense from a biological standpoint. If your stomach is struggling to do its job, B12 is liberated and then protected by intrinsic factor in the stomach. Without it, you can get things like pernicious anemia, you can get fatigue, you can get all these things that are related to how your stomach is processing B12. Well, now we have these like 5,000, 10,000 microgram B12 supplements because everybody's low on B12. What if it's just coming out of your stomach? What if you just had some intrinsic factors? So HCL Guard is an innovation in that it's a biomimicking formula of your stomach acid, and it includes organic herbs that help with prokinetic, which is basically moving the food through your body. So that's what HCL Guard is. And then Holozymes is my answer to, as a clinician, I saw like over 350 people. As a clinic, we saw well over 600 people. We had multiple doctors working underneath of me. And over again, we had no reliable enzyme to give to people. The most expensive things on the market were Digest Gold ATP Pro and Thorne Dipan 9. And I would have people combine them. That's like $180 a month. And I would still get inconsistent results. Like less than 50% of people were getting the reduction in bloating, the reduction in the food sensitivities, the reduction in loose stools, those types of things that you would normally see. No more food pieces in the toilet, oily toilets, all those things. That's what you should see going down if you're a clinician and you have a product that's working like a digestive enzyme. Holozymes, I literally scoured the world because I have these issues. I need it for myself, but also it just pains me when things don't work less than 80% of the time for people. And what I found was, again, biochemistry. If you use an enzyme that comes from a non-animal, so it's a vegetarian or a vegan enzyme, it's missing its mineral cofactor. A pancreatic enzyme, a brushwater enzyme, a pig extract, a cow extract, pancreatin, those are all those things. They come with a cofactor or a mineral tied to the enzyme. That mineral is it's like the energy source for the enzyme to do its work. So the reason why I was getting inconsistent results was it was based on the person's meal they were eating and whether or not there was a free mineral floating around that the enzyme would hit and turn on, which is that's just terrible design. That's an engineering 101. Like, that's terrible
It's
design.
hyper focused in one direction without thinking holistically about the process that's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. And like, again, I'm the guy who says, if someone said I have the reason or I have the answer to the enzymes, I buy them on my own dime and say, fine, I'll try it. And if it doesn't work, I know they're not onto it yet. And if it does work, then I give it to all my friends and I ask them to try it. And if it works for all them, then I know I'm onto something. And that's what happened with this PhD that I met in Utah. He had a patent on turning enzymes on, and he was trying to like scream on top of the mountain in Utah to try to get people to listen to him for like over 15 years. No one would listen. And holozymes is basically the marrying and the strengthening of his work with his activation molecules or system, basically, which is like some fulvic acids and some minerals, trace minerals, things like that. And I mean, it just works. Like, I mean, what you want from an enzyme product, either digestively or systemically, which could be a whole nother show, it just works. And that's why I'm so excited. And we've made it better and stronger every version. We're on version 3 now. We added in more help for breaking down polyphenols and salicylates, stuff that no other enzyme company is doing yet.
The really cool thing is that Stephen has created a special just for the Evolving Ageless podcast audience and the Ageless LX audience, which I think is pretty cool. So if you go to healthygut.com, which is his site, but healthygut.com/ageless holozymes, HOLOZYMES, that will take you directly to the holozymes page because there's a lot of education on these pages. So rather than just go to healthygut.com, if you go to the specific page, you can learn even more. Healthygut.com/ageless TRIX, TRIX. And then the other one is healthygut.com/ageless HCl. And that's for the hydrochloric acid. So all 3 of those different pages, what you'll find is there's a coupon code that you'll want to use called Ageless LX15. Ageless LX15 will get you $15 off on anything that you purchase on any of these pages. Now, in our show notes at evolvingageless.com, you'll find this episode, and in the show notes will be all these links, so you don't have to stress. So, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. You bringing your wisdom, your experience, your determination to never take the status quo as working and always finding things in digestive health that are going to make a difference in the lives of people. So thank you so much for joining us here today and educating us.
Thank you, Michelle.
What did you think of that? That was incredible, wasn't it? I mean, it's like going back to school when we have these amazing people on, these experts that just know so much about any given topic and dive deep. So hopefully now you understand the importance of the gut and how it really plays into systemic inflammation and how it could lead us to age. So join me next week, same time, where I'll be joined by another expert in the field of anti-aging, nutrition, health, beauty. For now, keep on living ageless, and I'll see you next time.